About a year and a half ago now, I made a video on none other than Grizzlies. For that video, I bought a VR so I could play the newly released Grizzlies VR. I'm not really proud to say that, but after that video, I used my shiny new Quest 2 a grand total of 1 time. And it was for Help Wanted 2. Hear me out for a minute. I simply do not get the hype around VR. Sure, it was super neat when it was that cool new gadget my friends had like 6 years ago, but the experience hasn't changed one bit. It's still as awkward, nauseating, and uncomfortable as I remember it being when I was like 12. I think the sole reason I never play VR games ever is because I absolutely hate setting it up. Every single time something goes wrong, my drivers are out of date, it needs a system update, or it needs some very specific setting to be turned on. It just never works and is so frustrating every single time. Half of the time I don't even bother if it takes over 20 minutes and I go find something else to do. You'd think with something as mainstream as a Quest 2 would just be plug and play, but no. It takes so much unnecessary effort and I just couldn't be bothered. So why am I even bothering making another video using VR? Well, to be honest, the thing just sits on my shelf. I don't use it, and to be perfectly honest, it felt like a waste of time and money. I used it once for Grizzlies and once for Help Wanted 2, and that was about it. So I wanted to give it another shot. At least with some more quality fan games than Grizzlies. So I went to GameJolt and found some that looked pretty decent, and here we are. I'm gonna play each game and give a mini review of sorts, and then at the end I'll come back to this and see if maybe the games make up for a lot of the VR's physical faults. The first game I played for this video was PolarDread, a game which I had planned on playing way before this, but just never got around to. It's technically not a fan game, more so a FNAF-like, in the sense that there's a sit and survive element mixed with some animatronic threats. It isn't marketed as a fan game, and is even published to the Oculus Store. It's for sure in that weird gray area where I'm unsure if I should even be referring to it as a fan game or not. PolarDread was made by Squeaks2Corgay, who is more so known for Shipwrecked 64, which is probably my favorite horror type of game this year, so I was definitely expecting the best, and to be completely honest, I was right. For some context, PolarDread takes place in the Cloud9 Resort, a place with a large winter-themed aesthetic. As to be expected, there's a bunch of animatronic characters. The game kind of just throws you into this environment where you're supposed to figure everything out on your own, minus a small tutorial, but I think it's where the gameplay shines a lot. Seriously, if you have not played this yet and you were able to, don't watch any further, go play it right now. Trust me, going in blind is the absolute best way to experience this. The one thing everyone says about this game, and that I can attest to, is that its gameplay is great. I agree 1000%. Like, it takes the absolute best mechanics from FNAF games and just kind of combines them all into this perfect balance of resource management and frantically trying to find and deal with threats. PolarDread gets so stressful so quickly, and with the added bonus of being in VR, just makes this one of the best experiences I've had in a while. As you'd expect, the main gameplay takes place in this office of sorts inside of the resort. One thing you may not notice on video but was super obvious in VR was just how dark the space was. Like, you could not see anything without the flashlight that's given to you. So in this office, there's a door on the far right side and a vent directly behind you. On the first night, there's only 2 threats you need to worry about. This seal named Perry that'll crawl through the vents and can only really be seen by shining the light down. There's also Snark, who will wander throughout the building, and we just have to close the door on him when he's there. There's a power meter that will slowly drain with the doors being shut and can be viewed on your watch, which also tells the time in game. There's not a lot of movement in this first night and only really serves as a foundation for the gameplay to come later. Night 2, however, introduces us to 2 new characters, Slush Bear and this pink Bonnie head on the wall. Slush Bear isn't fooled by the door, so when he shows up, you'll need to physically move down and hide under the desk. This mechanic is translated super well into VR and genuinely felt insane. Something I didn't know until after I finished the game was that if you can predict when Slush Bear will enter the room, you can crouch down early and he'll skip the phase where he's just looking for you in the office. And instead, he'll just leave immediately. It plays a lot into the high-risk, high-reward factor of this game that you'll see later. The other character this night is a head on the wall that will start singing in random intervals. When it does, this will speed up the movements in which the characters can get to you. To get it to stop, you have to throw items at it. You can throw just about anything, from toys to office props to even glass bottles that'll shatter really loudly. This will be important later. In the later nights, there's even more threats, like this other head on the wall that will start doing the same thing as the pink body. So you have to multitask while these characters can start talking and completely mess you up. There's also this blind character named Wacky Mole, I think that's what I've been told, and his mechanic is the same as Music Man's from UCN, where he's noise activated, and by making too much noise, he'll aggro and kill you. There's Vicky, another character who will appear in another vent to your left when the TV in your office goes off. You have to do the same thing as Slush Bear and crouch under the desk until it stops. There's also this mouse thing, like the mini arenas from Sister Location. You have to pick them off and remove them when they get in front of you and block your vision. You got all that? Basically, what I'm saying is that PolarDread goes from 0 to 100 really fast, and it's genuinely hard to keep up sometimes, especially with how difficult the game is at first. I did get it eventually, but after what felt like hours of trial and error. After each night though, you have an opportunity to play a minigame to earn some extra throwable items. You have to roam the basement and reset the power by pressing the buttons that are the same color as your watch. As to be expected, you're not alone, but thankfully it's just Wacky Mole, the blind guy I talked a little bit about earlier. Unfortunately, he's an alcoholic and has lots of bottles scattered all over. The bottles will break and alert the mole even by just touching them, so it's just best to avoid them altogether. It kind of works out like the main gameplay does, where there's high risk, high reward. You could risk shattering a bottle by picking it up, but if you can do so and throw it to the opposite end of the room, you can keep Wacky Mole away for a long period of time. However, if you're just super unlucky and step on a bottle anyway, it'll alert him to the location of the bottle. So if you're both super fast and careful, you can just move out of the way before he notices. I've always hated blind characters in video games, like Figure from Doors and the Garradors from Resident Evil, but to be completely honest, I really don't mind this guy at all. He feels super fair, and I never felt cheated out of a death. It just felt fair and deserved. That's about it for PolarDread. There is an ending to the game, but I got the bad ending, and to be perfectly honest, I don't feel like trying to find the good one, if there even is one. Being in VR for a long enough period of time does get pretty disorienting, and I was just ready to move on. However, this was a very strong start, and an absolute must-play if you own a VR. UCN VR is another game I've wanted to check out for a while, but just never got around to. It's exactly what you'd expect it to be. Ultimate Custom Night in virtual reality. It's a pretty faithful port, all things considered, created by Euro, who's been porting some of the other FNAF games into VR. However, very much like normal UCN, this game is not scary even when everything is right in front of you. I don't get the impression that this game was meant to be scary though. Sure, this game got cleaned up pretty well compared to the original, but at its core, it's literally just UCN. I wasn't expecting anything more, but I don't have a lot else to say on it because if you've ever played UCN, you've also played UCN VR. There are some minor differences to accommodate being in VR, like how the side vent is moved to almost behind you. There's a trio of monitors on the desk that display all the information you'd ever need. It's all done in a really clever way that makes good use of the space. In fact, a lot of the character spawn locations are moved to either your left or right side as opposed to being directly in front of you. I noticed almost immediately how out of reach everything in the office was. Like, it does not come across at all on video, but it felt as if I was standing a couple feet back from everything. I play in a pretty small space as it is, and it felt a couple of times like I was going to hit something reaching for the mask or flipping through the cameras. I also found out a little after I played for the first time that I probably should have been sitting instead, so I did that and everything was much easier to see and reach. The main gameplay of UCN VR is just that of UCN, so I went ahead and played all of the challenges and ended up beating a couple of them. And yes, I did try 50/20. It's as overwhelming as it is normally, but with the added bonus of not being able to see anything in the office for multiple seconds at a time. Overall, not just in 50/20 is UCN VR much harder than the base game. I think it's probably in the way how you need to adjust to where everything is now and how there aren't any hotkeys at all, but just physical buttons in the office they need to press. I'll say this right now because I think it would be fun. 10k likes and I'll beat 50/20 in VR. I mean it, I'll do it. New Hire is another game I was recommended to play a while back. It's pretty short for what it's worth, but is another great example of a game using its eeriness to its advantage. There's no real tutorial or phone call like PolarDread, so you're immediately thrown into the game right away. There is a clipboard on the desk that gives some basic instructions on how to deal with the first threat, this animatronic dog named Shiba. There's also some exposition like the office is super messy and the equipment is broken, so you'll have to make do in the middle of this building. There aren't any cameras, but you do have a baby monitor that's hooked up to a microphone in each of the rooms. You can cycle between the rooms, and there's even a map to match where the audio is coming from. Shiba plays music, so if you hear something, you can just find out where he is using the map. Once he gets into your office space, you can just use the black light to see if he's there. And if he is, you turn off the lights until he leaves. Super straightforward. Night 2 is essentially the same thing, but with Porter, this giant parrot that's been sitting next to you this whole time. If he turns on, you just have to press a button to turn him off. These mechanics are super easy to understand, which I feel is good because the game does manage to speed up quite a bit in the later nights. Night 3 is, again, the same as before, but now there's an endo walking around that will occasionally occasionally end up in front of you. Flashing the light in his face made him go away, so it's not a big deal. That's literally the entire gameplay, with nights 4 and 5 speeding up the pace a lot. However, each night there's a little bit of a story going on with the employees trying to get the security office back up again. They keep noticing this radio that everyone thought was broken that kept turning on periodically. Everyone thought it was creepy and hadn't bothered to fully check it out, so after our shift on the 5th night, we're asked to go back and take a look. The broken radio tells us to listen, and after a couple of seconds, the lights go out and Shiba can be seen at the end of the hall. He rushes us, and the game ends. While New Hire may have been pretty short compared to the other games I've played so far, it definitely was not bad at all. A lot of the ambience is just unsettling enough to be creepy, but not overly scary. My only real wish for this game, if it ever receives another update, is for some new mechanics that better utilize it being in VR. I could see this game being very easily portable to a flat version, whereas something like PolarDread, where you're constantly moving around or throwing something, I couldn't. But overall, a very worthwhile game to check out, and it didn't take very long to complete, which is also a little nice. The final game I wanted to talk about today is a game that's not even out yet. So my friend Hunter has been working on this FNAF version of Crawl Space called Claustrophobic Nights for quite a while now. It's supposed to be fully multiplayer on launch with a ton of maps and cool puzzles, and it just looks really good. Now the thing is, I've had early access to this for months, and I have yet to touch it, because as I've stated earlier, I hate setting up VR. I didn't even know if I'd be able to record this because it's like all early access and beta stuff, but when I asked Hunter, he was like, "You want even more footage?" So here we are. Now, like I said, this game is still in very early alpha, like probably a little too early to be making a video on this, but there is still a lot here. The main premise of this game is that you're a repairman or whatever and need to crawl through the vents and do puzzles, doing all of this while being chased by Ennard and the other threats. It's really simple, but works super well. The game, of course, being heavily inspired by Crawl Space, even down to the way of moving through the vents by using hand motions to simulate crawling. It's super well implemented and feels really fine-tuned. The version I played didn't have any animatronics working, so I didn't really get the full experience like I had hoped, but it's probably for the best since I would have for sure had a heart attack. Hunter is uploading devlogs every so often, so if you're curious about the game or its dev cycle, I'd recommend checking them out. As for the final release of the game, I really don't know. It's definitely upcoming, but when it does release, I'll have to check it out again. So, after a couple of days of playing, it's safe to say that a lot of the small indie projects are a lot better than some of the AAA VR games at the moment. I'm still super undecided if I even like VR or not, but at least there's some actual options of games to play. Again, I still absolutely hate setting everything up and how clunky it feels, but I can't lie, once it gets going though, it's really a lot of fun if you can ignore how uncomfortable wearing this thing is. Who knows, maybe in the future once everything seems to be stable, I'll come back to this topic and try some more games. Hopefully then most of my issues will be resolved. Who knows if that'll be the case then.